All right, let's dive in. I've been going through this stack of material you sent, and it really hits this critical point where massive wealth concentration meets the changing role of our biggest financial institutions.
It really does. And our mission here is to unpack the central claim in these sources that a series of policy shifts created what they call an antisocial contract.
An antisocial contract, and that, in turn, led to a so-called hoarding economy.
Exactly. The idea is that the economic rules were sort of rewritten to favor massive accumulation at the very top.
Okay, so let's get into that structural critique. The argument seems to be that policymakers, deliberately turn these policy dials on, things like taxes, finance, competition, to funnel wealth upwards.
Yes, and that effectively created two parallel economies. But the key consequence, and this number is just staggering, comes from a Rand Corporation study cited throughout this material.
I saw that, yeah.
It calculates that if those dials hadn't been turned to encourage hoarding between 1975 and 2018, the average middle-class and working-class family would have, well, collectively added an estimated $50 trillion to their balance sheets.
50 trillion. I mean, that's almost hard to comprehend. That's the scale of the transfer we're talking about.
That's the scale.
So for those who say these shifts were, necessary for efficiency, how exactly did this hoarding mechanism work, according to the sources?
Well, it was really a two-pronged thing. First, policymakers weakened antitrust laws, which reduced competition. And second, and this is critical, they reframed the entire social purpose of a corporation. The goal shifted away from long-term stability or community investment and toward one single thing: maximizing shareholder stock value.
And there's a direct line drawn from that shift to a major drag on the whole economy, right? Productivity growth is the key metric here.
A huge drag, yeah.
Yeah.
Productivity was humming along at 2.8% a year from 48 to 73. But by the 2000s, it had fallen to just 1.2%.
And that kind of drop over decades, that's massive. It means the economic engine just isn't generating the same surplus.
Exactly. And you see the result in the wealth divergence. Even after all these economic expansions, the total net worth of the bottom 50% of Americans is actually 20% less than it was in 1990.
Wow. Which I think leads to this idea you flagged, negative stability. It's an aerospace term, but it's being applied here to economics.
Right. In engineering, it's a system where small shakes get worse and worse until the whole thing risks crashing.
So in this context, the shakes are what? Asset bubbles, recession.
Precisely. The argument is that hoarding wealth at the top creates this inherent instability, political and economic, that requires bigger and bigger interventions just to keep the system from breaking.
Okay, so that's the theory. But where do we see this playing out in a really tangible way? The sources point pretty directly at housing.
Yes, this is a perfect example. You see these huge financial players moving into spaces that were traditionally for, smaller investors, or just families. Look at Lloyds Banking Group in the UK.
The country's biggest retail bank.
They created a subsidiary, Citra Living, with the explicit goal of becoming a massive corporate landlord in the private rental market.
And the scale is what's key here. Their goal is reportedly to buy 50,000 homes by 2030. They can use the bank's super low funding costs and market data.
Advantages that a normal family trying to buy a home just can't compete with. It's the perfect illustration of hoarded capital being turned into asset accumulation in an absolutely essential sector.
So if turning the dials one way created the problem, is there a proposed fix for turning them back?
There is. They lay out a 4-dial anti-hoarding agenda. The most ambitious proposal is to actually tax unproductive hoarding to fund something called citizens' capital accounts.
So instead of trickle down, this is designed to be gush up economics.
That's the vision. You put capital directly into the hands of every American, giving them a real financial stake. The analogy they use is the NFL.
The NFL, how does that work?
Well, the league uses salary caps and the draft to keep any one team from hoarding all the talent. It ensures broad competition, which actually makes the entire league, the whole enterprise, more valuable for everyone.
Ah, I see. So the idea is that dispersing capital ownership makes the whole system more resilient and productive because that money gets put to use right away in local economies.
Exactly. But before we finish, we do have to point out a really sharp disagreement within these sources on our current tax system.
Absolutely. Some sources make the case that the federal income tax is, in fact, highly progressive. They point out that the wealthiest 1% pay about 40% of all federal income taxes.
True, but other analyses fire back that that's a narrow view. If you factor in all taxes, sales, property, payroll, and measure it against total wealth, not just income.
Then the picture changes.
Completely. By that measure, they argue the effective rate for the top 1% is actually much lower than for the other 99%.
Yeah.
It really depends on what you're measuring.
A fascinating tension right at the heart of this whole debate.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. Adam Smith's very first principle of taxation was that people should contribute in proportion to their interest in the estate, basically their wealth. So the question is, how far have we strayed from that idea, and what are the real long-term costs of that divergence?
Many years ago, there lived an emperor who cared so enormously for beautiful new clothes that he spent all his money on them. He had a coat for every hour of the day. Then one day, two cheats came, a weaver and a tailor. They persuaded the emperor and courtiers that they could weave beautiful clothes that only people who are stupid cannot see. They would be capital clothes, thought the emperor. And he gave the two cheats a great deal of cash in hand so that they might begin their work at once. They immediately demanded the finest silk and the costliest gold. This they put into their own pockets and worked at the empty looms till late at night. Everyone pretended they could see the cloth the weaver was making. The night before the procession, the weaver and tailor pretended to be hard at work completing the clothes. Now the clothes are ready. When the emperor put on the new clothes, he said, "One would think one had nothing on at all, they are so light." The procession began, and everyone pretended they could see the clothes, until at last a child in the crowd shouted out, "Oh, look, he's got nothing on!" And then straight away, the whole crowd shouted, "He has nothing on!" Hans Christian Andersen doesn't say what happened to the cheats.